Welcome back. In the last video, we stopped at the step where we introduced a new custom menu, and we associated that menu with the data upload function. If you remember, Ryan commented this line of code, upload forms.show. So in this video, we're going to add this upload form, which essentially is going to be our date big form. So in order to add a form, we can use this insert option in our VBA editor and select user form option. So what it does, under the forms folder, it adds this blank user form, and now we can just customize it as per our needs. So the first thing we want to do is we want to rename this form. Let's name it with the same name we mentioned in our code. So we will use this upload form name. To do that, you go into the properties, and in the first line here, you can change that, and we'll name it upload form. And you can hit enter after changing the name. Notice our name of the form has changed to upload form. Next, so click inside the form. This toolbox automatically gets populated. If you don't see it, you can go and you can do view and select the toolbox option. So we need a couple of things. We need a label. So just drag the label here. Then we need a field where we'll be typing or selecting our date. So in this case, let's use the text box. And we need two buttons. One of them will be OK, and another one will be cancel button. So let's find the button here. There we go. So button number 1 and button number 2. So that's all we need. Now we can close our toolbox. Now let's reshape this form to make it look nice. So let's change this header. Click on it, and under the captions properties, let's name it net revenue upload. Something meaningful to the user. Now label, let's click on it. Then we want to change the caption. That's what the user is going to see. And let's change it to date. And it looks very small, so let's change the font. So here, find the font option, click on it, and select this triple dot. This opens up this font editor menu. So let's make it font size 10. Okay, it looks better now. Maybe let's make it even bigger. Let's make it 12. Okay, perfect. And then you can kind of drag this area here and limit the size this label takes. Next, click on this text box. Let's rename it because we will be referencing this text box in our code. So let's remove this one in the name, and let's add date. So the name will be date text box. And same thing, let's change the font. So find the font option here. Let's make it 12. So now we want to place it next to our date label. And we can just expand it to make it look a little bigger. Yeah, this will do. Next, let's rename this button. So I prefer to remove the number and remove the comment because the name is too lengthy, and I'll put OK button. And let's change the caption of this button to OK. Again, let's change the font to 12. And similarly, we will change the second button. We'll rename it to cancel button. And in the caption, let's type cancel. Font 12. Now let's rearrange it a little bit. So let's move these buttons up. Let's change the size of our form. Okay, the buttons look too big, so let's make them a little smaller. Yeah, this looks better. And by the way, you can highlight them like this, and you can drag both of them simultaneously. And I forgot one little detail. So let's add another label. Again, to bring up the toolbar toolbox, let's select that option from the menu and let's drag another label underneath our date text box. And what I would like this label to represent is like a tip for the user, like what data they need to be inputting in this text box. So in the caption, let's change it to month, /date, year. So this is the US date format, and let's see how this looks. Okay, we want to keep it small so it doesn't stand out compared to the other labels, because this is just a tip, and let's drag it to be in the center. By the way, if you want to position it right in the middle of this text box, so you select both of them, start with the label, and using the Control key, click on the text box, and in the format menu, you can align them. You can align them in many different ways. So in our case, we want to align their centers, and there you go. All right, so now that we have all our controls in place, we can start coding the functionality of these controls. In order to assign the procedures to our elements, we need to double-click that element. Let's start with the cancel button. Double-click it, and you can see that private sub cancel button underscore click event is auto-populated, and inside this sub, we can define everything that we want to happen when the user selects cancel. So first thing we want to do, we want to close the data file that was previously opened. In order to do that, let's write this command workbooks. And what workbooks we're referring to? We're referring to data file. Remember, we made this data file variable as global, so we can reference it in this module. And it has an event close. And we also don't want to save it, otherwise the system will ask and will prompt us whether or not we want to save the changes. So to avoid that prompt, let's type save changes. You can kind of see you're getting the tips. If you're not sure about the spelling, you can always reference these tips. And then you have to type it like double column equals and false. And another thing we want to do, we want to unload our form. There is a command to do that, unload space me. So now if you want to test it, let's save it. Now let's say I want to run this form. So to run, to kind of debug your form, you have this icon, the green triangle, run sub user form. So if I click on it, it actually loads the form. And if I click cancel, this piece of code needs to be executed. So we do that, and we expect, well, actually we got an error because we never loaded the data file, right? So you can see if you click debug, it will tell you where the error happened exactly. So to stop the execution, you can click this stop reset button. And let's say we want to test it again, we will need to uncomment. In order to uncomment a line, you can just put apostrophe at the beginning of that line. So let's remove this workbook close function, and let's run it again. And if you click cancel, where did it go? Oh, there it is. And if we click cancel, it cancels the event. Okay, so this works. Let's return this line of code. Put tab so it's easier to read. Now the next event we want to assign is we want to auto-populate today's date in this date text box. So there is an event, you cannot double click it, so you have to do it manually. So you can open this editor and position the cursor somewhere in the empty area. And remember these two drop boxes. So I want to have a user form object, and I want to have an action activate. So when the user form gets activated, we would like to have certain code executed. So what we want to do, let's comment this get current date. So this reminds us what this line of code does. And let's go back to our form. So we select this text box, and now we need to use the name of this text box. Let's just copy it from here, go back. And what we want to do when the form gets activated, date text box dot text, we want it to be equal to today's date. So there is a function to bring in today's date. It's now function, but it's not enough alone. So we want to format it so that it equals to this format: month, month, date, date, year, year, year. So let's do this. So there is a command called format. Open the parentheses. So we already have our first argument. Now we put comma, and we want to specify the format we would like to see our date in. And we will put exactly the same format we put in our label: month, month, date, year, year, year. Okay, that should work. So let's also save it. And now let's debug it again. Let's load the form. And notice right away we are getting today's date. For me, it's May 13th, 2022. You can still change it if you'd like. So we can put like January 13, 2022. But default date gets populated correctly. So let's cancel this. Oh, again, we are getting an error because of that line of code. I'll just ignore it. All right, so now that we defined our cancel and user form activate functions, let's define what happens when the user selects OK. So double click on the OK button. Let me just move it down. All right, so now we are ready to code the actual data upload. Again, in order to save us some time, I have pre-populated the code we need inside OK button click procedure. So let's just go through it. Okay, first thing we want to do, we want to validate the user input. Remember, we have the date text box on our form. So we don't want the user to accidentally input some wrong values. This is exactly why we have this validation piece of code. We use two if statements. So what in the first line, we have if trim date text box that text equals nothing, then we want to prompt a message saying date field can be blank, and the title of this message will be net revenue, and we want to assign like informational disclaimer to that message. And the next line, exit sub, it basically exits the execution of this code, and it forces the user to take some action with the date text box. What trim does, trim ensures that user doesn't put like a space. And when we verify that our date text box is not blank, like we want to make sure that the space doesn't count. So then, so if this text box is not blank, it will go to the next if statement. And here, what we want to do is we are comparing the format of the date text box input, and we are saying if not, trim date text box that text like. Like is an operator that compares the values versus like this format. So these pound signs represent the numbers. So in here we have like two numbers, / another two numbers, / four numbers. So this is exactly the format, the date format we expect the user to input. So if this is not true, again, we are prompting a message saying date field must be entered in this specific format, and it stops the execution of this code if it's not done correctly. Okay, once we pass the validation, we don't want to keep displaying the form, but we still want to keep it in the memory so the rest of the code gets executed. In order to hide the form, we use this command me.hide. And you're already familiar with this line of code: application screen updating equals false. This is just to make sure that whatever happens on the screen is not visible to the end user, and it actually helps to expedite the execution of the code. Okay, next we define these variables. They are all needed in the next steps. So we need to have a column, variable, row data, last row data. All of them are assigned long type. And then for one of these variables, last row data, this is how we, one of the ways to identify the last row in our data file. So we reference this data file in this manner, like workbook main data file, and then we reference the first sheet, and we use this trick with cells. And then once we open the parentheses, the first comment we want to execute is rows.count. And this number 1 represents the first column. And we use this command and xlup.row. So just remember, this is the type of command you can use in order to identify the last row in your data file. Then we define another variable, upload date, as date. And we want to convert it to the date format, because remember, when the user inputs it, the system recognizes it as text. So we want to use this cDate function, and we pass it date text box.text argument, and it converts it to the actual date the system can understand. Next, so what we want to do, we want to find column to fill up. Okay, so this is where we can look at our report, and we want to what we want to do is we want to identify the range of cells that we want to populate. So in the first column, we have the names of our customers, and in columns starting from B until H, we have the dates, right? And in your case, it can be different, but you can adjust it as per your needs. So going back to our code, so we have to define another variable, column date as long. And next, we use the iterator for next. And remember, we defined this column variable. So we want to iterate through column variable with the first argument equals 2 until value 8. So again, how did I get these numbers? If you look at our report, column B is the second column in our worksheet, and column H is 8th column. If you drag it, you're going to see in this little corner here, 8. So again, going back to our code. So we iterate through each column, and we compare the upload date that we captured from our date text box, and we compare that value with the values in row number 4 in for each of these columns, okay, that we can see on our main week 1 worksheet. So again, what we do, we just go through each of these cells values, and we compare each of them to the value in the text box, okay? So then again, going back to our code. So if it finds that the date inputted into the date text box actually equals to one of those values on the worksheet, it assigns that column index to this variable column date. Okay, so column date will be equal to whatever index the system goes through. For example, if you find our date to be equal to the value in the third column, like let's say the user inputs January 2nd, 2023, we will be returning index 3 into this variable. And once it's done, we can exit the loop. We don't need to keep looping until the last column. This helps to expedite the execution of the code. So then we have to make sure that we actually found a column where we have a match between the date inputted by the user with the date present on the worksheet. So if our column date equals 0, meaning it was never found, right? Again, we are prompting a message saying, hey, the upload date that you inputted in the user form has not been found on the report file. And it brings back the form that we made hidden earlier. And it exits the execution of the next code, and basically it forces the user to check their date input and correct it if necessary. However, if column date does not equal 0, this code will be skipped, and it moves to the next set of code. And here we are basically iterating through each row. And again, we have row equal 5 to 14. How did I get that? So if you look at our row where we have the first customer record, it's row number 5, and the last customer record is in row number 14. Okay. And there is a way to make it dynamic, but I'm not going to go through that today. So again, we're iterating through each row, and what we want to do before we actually perform any kind of comparison, we want to assign the value 0. So if nothing is found for that customer for that specific date, we will just populate 0 amount into that cell. Okay. Then we have to include this nested iterator. So we will be looping through each row in our data file, starting from row 2, because in row 1 we have our header, until the last row in our data file. Remember, we captured that value in this line. Okay, and then we will be comparing the value that we have in our data file in column number 3. So let's open our data file and see how this looks like. Okay, so you see the date is in column number 3. All right. So then going back to our code. So if that value equals to the date the user specified, right? And then you have we have this operator AND, okay? And I'm just moving the next line to the next row to make it look nicer. We have to also make sure that the customer in the data file matches to the customer on our master worksheet, right? And this is exactly what I'm doing here. I'm comparing our data file value in column number 2. Let's go back and look at it. So in column number 2, we have the customer description, okay? And we are comparing it to the customer description we have in our master report. All right. So then if both of these conditions are met, okay, that's what AND operator does. It makes sure that both conditions are met. Then we want to populate the values. So we assign to our master worksheet week 1. And here's the important part to understand. So while iterating through the rows and columns, right, we already know the column date index from this piece of code, right? So now our row, as we iterate through each row for each customer, right, and if we find this match, so the row will represent the index through which we are iterating, right? And again, just to give you an example, if we are trying to populate Apple Store for January 1st, 2023, right? During the iteration, we will be actually looking, we already know the column will be number 2. The row will be 5 because we will find this Apple Store match right away in row number 5. So this is the cell that our code will be updating, okay? Again, going back here. So what value we are assigning to the cell? Again, we want to have the net revenue. So the net revenue is calculated by extracting the cost of sales from the revenue. So again, if you look at our data file, we have the sales value and we have the cost of sales value. So we want to minus the cost of sales from the sales, right? Again, if you want to use the indexes, column number, sales column will be column number 4, cost of sales column will be column number 5. And going back to our code, this is exactly what we are doing. We are deducting from column number 4 value, we are deducting column number 5 value. So they're identical. The only difference is this column number within our cell arguments. Okay. And then once we found this match, we are exiting the loop, the internal loop, not the entire loop, but just this internal loop, because we already found the match. There is no point looping through the rest of the data rows since we already found the date and the customer. And again, this is assuming in our data file, we only have one record for one customer per day. Okay, there can be different situations and there is a way to handle them, but this video doesn't cover that. So then We are closing our loops here, and once this whole loop is executed and we iterate through all the data, through all the rows actually, and we find a match, then what you want to do, you want to close this data file in this row, and then these last lines of code, what it does is it actually, okay, we are putting the status bar equals to false. Actually, I never included the code to update the status bar, and I'm just gonna show it to you in the next video. But let's keep this line of code here, and then application screen updating, we return it to true just to make sure that once our code execution is done, then the screen updates with no issues. And last thing, we want to unload our form because there is no point keeping it in the memory once the code is executed. Now it's time to test our code. There is one more thing we need to do. Let's go back to our main module and let's uncomment this line, upload form.show, now that our form is ready. And then we want to compile our code. So in debug menu, select this compile VBA project option, run it. If there are no errors, you're not going to see any messages, just save it. And then let's close our VBA editor and let's use the add-ins, upload sales data. Now we need to select our data sample, open it. Next, we get this date pick form. So on our report, we have January information. So let's change this date. So to January, let's pick like January 3rd, 2023. That's what we have on our report. And select OK. And there you have it. The data from the data file was picked up. It was correctly identified. And it was populated here. And you see how it didn't take us much time at all. So with this, I conclude the series of these videos, and I hope you were able to follow me, and I apologize if some of the steps were unclear. If you have any comments, please feel free to mention them under this video. Otherwise, thank you for watching and good luck.